Hi, my name's Charlie. My daughter just bought a laser engraver and Lightburn software. She is of the artistic bent. I think it skipped a generation since neither I nor her mother are. At any rate, she asked me if I'd make a video for her to help her get started. She said most of the videos either skip steps or assume a level of experience that she does not have. So I made this video. I'm not a professional at this, but I think it works to help someone who has never done this to get started. The assumption being that once you learn a little bit and are successful, you'll learn more on your own, or with those other videos. I'm calling this Engraving with Lightburn for Newbies, and thought maybe it'll help someone else. I want to start with a safety note. Laser light can be dangerous. Looking at laser light is like looking at the eclipse of the sun, but worse. If you look at the light unprotected, it can permanently damage your retina. You won't feel it, but you'll know it because you'll have degraded vision. My point, wear your laser glasses when you're operating the laser. For this video, we're using a longer Ray 5-watt diode laser engraver and are using Lightburn control and design software. The 5 watt is the lowest laser power available. The wattage can vary from 5 watts to 100 plus watts. The more watts, then the more things you can do, and the more it will cost you to do it. A 5-watt laser can do some engraving on almost any material, but it's limited to cutting only a few kinds of material, and then nothing over 1/4 inch or 6.3 millimeters. I assume that you have a laser engraver assembled and connected to electricity. You have Lightburn software installed on your computer, and your computer is connected to the laser using a USB cable. You can do all of that without knowing how to use the engraver or the software, but you may have worked with it some already, so just bear with me if you are already familiar with some of what I'm sharing. Note, you can also connect the computer to the laser engraver using your Wi-Fi, but I'm not going to address that in this video, keeping it simple. Before you crank up your laser, you should decide on the project you want to create. Are you going to use images? Are you going to design in Lightburn, or maybe both? I recommend that you sketch your project out or use a graphics app like PowerPoint to create a visual or draft of what you want your project to look like, to include dimensions. Decide what kind of material or medium you're going to use. In this case, we're going to use a 4" by 4" unfinished or blank piece of poplar wood with rounded corners. It's 2.5 millimeters thick, which is about 1/10 of an inch. When I measured the wood piece, it was actually 3 7/8 inches by 3 7/8 inches. So remember to measure twice and engrave once. Okay, I'll orient you on Lightburn. Lightburn is a very powerful tool, but like a lot of apps, you may only need a small percentage of Lightburn's functionality or what it can do to create your engraving. We'll create the project first because it takes a good bit of time to set a project up in Lightburn, and you don't need your laser engraver connected to do that. As you can see, there's a lot of information on the Lightburn screen. It's very busy, and it can be overwhelming actually. But we'll only talk about the parts that we'll use for this video. There are tons of great videos on YouTube that will help you learn about the rest that Lightburn and your engraver can do. A note, engraving is like anything that's worth doing. It takes a lot of study, preparation, and practice if you want to do it well. So let's walk through the screen, and I'll highlight the parts that we'll be using to create the project, and then we can connect to the engraver. At the top left, you can see the main menu. File is where you create a new project. Notice you can use the shortcut keys Ctrl+N to also start a new project. There are shortcut keys for many of the menu items. There are also icons on the screen that will do the same thing. My point is there's a number of ways to do the same thing. You have to decide which one or ones work for you. You can view a list of recently saved projects to open an existing project, or select Open to open a particular project. Use Import to add an image from your computer, and Save to save the changes to the project. There are other options, but we'll not learn about them at this time. For the Edit menu, the only option we'll be using is Device Settings, which also has an icon at the top of the screen. The Tools menu allows you to use a select arrow to pick one or more objects. You can also press the spacebar to go to the select mode. And there's also a list of tool icons on the lower left side of the screen that allow you to create shapes and add or change text. The last main menu item we'll be using is the Windows menu. This is a list of functional menus with even more options, but we're only going to use 4 of those menus: the Console, Cuts and Layers, Laser, and Move. As we talk about each menu, I'm going to explain what you do, but not go into details of why you do it. Notice that the top of the Windows menu is the option to reset to default layout. As you work with the menus and change which ones you can see, you might need to reset things. It sets things back to the way they were when you opened Lightburn. You notice the menus that I mentioned: Cuts, Layers, Console, Move, and Laser are all open at this time on the right side. One of the things I found confusing was measurements. You have the option of using the standard or metric measurement systems. You should decide what you're going to use and then be consistent. Although I've not been told this, watching the online videos, most of the people were using the metric system. If you click on the gear icon to go to Settings, that was also a choice on the Edit menu, then select Units and Grids, you can see there are choices for both CO2 lasers and diode lasers. We're using a diode laser. Then you can choose millimeters per minute, inches per minute, or both. We're going to use millimeters per minute. There's a simple conversion if you need to go from inches to millimeters. Simply multiply the inches in decimal form by 25.4. Remember I said the physical size of the piece of wood we're using was 3 7/8 inches square? To convert that to millimeters, first I need to convert the fraction to a decimal. So I divide 7 by 8. That result is 0.875. So now I have 3.875 inches. Next, I multiply 3.875 times 25.4, which gives me 98.425 millimeters. And we're going to use that number later. By the way, here's a tip. You can use the scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in and zoom out. You can hold the scroll wheel down and you can pan left and you can pan right. That'll come in handy when you construct your project. Okay, so let's get started on the project. Remember the design? There are 4 parts: the outer edge of the wood, a border, an image, and some text. The first thing we're going to do is create a facsimile of our piece of wood in our workspace. From the Tools icon on the left, click on the rectangle icon. Now move the cursor over to the grid, click on the left mouse button, and drag out a square. You notice that the green square moved to the center of the object we just created. Click on the select arrow, and now let's make the grid a little bigger and move it to the center of the work area. Now we'll size the material. Click on the square we just created. At the top of the screen, below the main menu, you'll see width and height and a padlock. If you close a padlock, it will lock the proportional relationship between the width and height. We want to leave it unlocked. We're not going to use shortcut keys so you can see each step clearly. Do you remember the size that we computed earlier? 98.425 millimeters. We'll enter that for both width and height. Now let's zoom in and pan to the right to center the square. Look to the right and you'll see the Cuts Layers window. Each object you put on the grid is a separate layer and will have a different color associated with it, unless you group the objects, which makes them all part of one layer. Think of the object layers as being stacked one on top of the other. The square or layer is for reference only. Our design must fit inside the square. So when we start the laser engraving, we don't want to include this square in the engraving. The first column is the name of the layer. You can change it, but we'll leave it as 00. The first layer created in the project. The second is the color of the layer. Look at the lower left screen and you can see the possible colors and layers in Lightburn. Mode is how the laser will use the object. The options are line fill and offset fill. For this example, we're only going to use line and fill. If the object was an image, the only option you'd see right now will be image. The speed and power determines how fast the laser completes its pass with the object and how much power the laser uses to cut or fill. More on that later. Output turns the laser on and off for that layer. Since this square is for visual reference only, we'll switch the output to off. Show will mask the layer if you switch it off. You can use this as you build your project to make the screen a little less busy. Air or air assist is visible but requires that you buy and attach a separate device. An air assist uses compressed air and blows it onto the surface area where the engraving process is being carried out. It improves cutting quality by removing any debris that can clog up the cutting area and dissipates the fumes and smoke at the cutting spot, which avoids any hazardous situations like catching fire or filling your workspace with smoke. We don't have an air assist, so the switch can be on or off. It doesn't matter in this case. Now look at the bottom of the window and you can see pass count. You set that number to enhance the project or to deepen the cut. There are charts available on the internet which recommend settings for speed, power, and passes dependent upon the laser wattage, material, and whether you're engraving or cutting. The last thing we'll do with this object is round the corners. Select a square and then click on the radius icon on the left. Set the radius to 5 and then click on each corner of the square. Now click, select, and save. By the way, if you go to Settings, you'll see that Lightburn auto-saves your project by default every 2 minutes. You can adjust that time to suit your preference. The next thing we're going to do is create the border. So select the square, right mouse click, and then select copy, and then Right mouse click again and select Paste. So there is your square. Now assign a new layer to it. Change the size to 76.2 millimeters by 76.2 millimeters. Okay, now let's center this layer inside the first layer. Click outside both layers, then drag the mouse over both layers to select them both. Now click on the alignment icon and then on Align Centers to align both horizontal and vertical centers of both layers. Now let's adjust the layer settings for the second layer. Make sure you selected the second layer in the Cut Layers window. We're going to cut this layer, so we first consider material type and thickness. Our blanks are made out of poplar wood, 2.5 millimeters thick. Referring to our chart, we can see that this falls in between the settings on our chart, so we'll adjust the settings for this layer and use 200 millimeters per minute for the speed and 100% for the power. Whenever you're using slow speeds and high power settings with no air assist device, you must monitor the work for small fires. Although they're not a high risk with this project, using a 5-watt layer on wood, you would have to have a spray bottle with water close by. Just shut the laser off and spray the affected area. Okay, our image is next. Click on Import and then navigate to the folder that contains your image. After you've selected the image, assign a new layer to the image. And then size the image. Recall that the image is 50.8 millimeters by 55.88 millimeters. Notice with an image layer, image mode has replaced the other cut layers mode options. You cannot change the image mode. We'll use the plywood setting for engraving. The speed is 2000 millimeters per minute and the power is 100%. Now position the image inside the second layer by moving your cursor to the center of the image. When you see the 4 arrows, click and hold the left mouse button and move the image to the place you want it. Leaving space for the text we'll add under the image. We want to make certain the center of the image is aligned horizontally. So select all of the layers like we did before, and then use the alignment tool to align centers horizontally. Then click outside the layers and save your work. The last thing we're going to do is add some text. Click on the A icon on the left side of the screen and then click on the grid somewhere. Then type the text, in our case, Pathfinder. Notice that the letters are hollow. Click on the select arrow and then click on the text. Move the text to an open area so you can make some adjustments. Then you can change the font, the point size, bold, italics, etc. on the toolbar above the grid. We'll change the point size in a minute. Selecting the text, notice each corner has a curved arrow. Move your cursor over the upper right corner, press and hold the left mouse button, and drag the cursor left to see that you can size the text. Now move the text to position it under the image. You may need to adjust the size of the font. Once you've done that, click outside all the layers. Select all the layers and align the horizontal centers again. Let's click on Save to save our work. Now click on the text so we can make it its own layer. When we engrave the text, we want to fill the text in, so let's go back to the Cuts and Layers window. For the text layer, change the mode to Fill. Speed 2000 millimeters per minute, power 100%, and cycles or passes will be 1. I'm not going to address the interval setting with this project. We'll leave it at 0.1 millimeters. Okay, so we're done with designing the project, but there's still something else we need to do. When we run the laser, it starts with the layer at the top of the list and works down. We already told the laser to ignore the first layer, so it will start with the next layer. But we want to do all of our engraving before we cut anything. So we need to reorder our other 3 layers. We can move the border, layer 01, by clicking on it and dragging it to the bottom of the list. So the list should be 00, 02, 03, and 01. Output for 00 should be off. So the laser would be told to ignore 00, engrave 02 and 3, and cut 01. Save your work. Now let's focus on the laser. Okay, let's connect the computer to the laser. Connect the USB cable to the laser engraver and to the computer. Press the silver on-off button to start the engraver. We need to know what COM port the laser is using, so on your Windows machine, go to Start, Control Panel, Devices and Printers, Devices, Other Devices, and look for the USB serial connection. That's the laser engraver. And note the COM port it's using, in this case COM7. Now close the control panel and go back to Lightburn. Go to the laser window on the right side of the screen. Notice the word disconnected under the title laser. That's the laser status indication. Click on the down arrow next to devices and select the COM port you found in control panel. You should see that the disconnected has changed to ready, meaning that the computer and the laser engraver are talking to each other. When the laser is engraving or cutting, it will say busy. This window controls the laser. Pause will suspend the engraving. When the laser is running and you click on it, the laser will stop and the word will change to resume. Stop ends the job. Start starts the job from the beginning. Frame commands the laser to trace the path around the area where your project will be engraved and cut. When you frame, you can see if your material is positioned correctly, but it's hard to tell sometimes. But Lightburn has a way to set the laser up for framing so you can see the path with the laser light. First, find and mark the center of your material with a pencil. You can erase it later. Click on the screwdriver and wrench icon on the toolbar at the top of the page. Toggle on the Enable Laser Fire button on the right side of the window and laser on when framing. Set the laser power to 0.75%. We don't want to mark the material. Click OK to apply the new settings. Now, click on the Move window on the right side of the screen. You should see the Fire button and the power should show 0.75%. You can toggle the Fire button on and off to determine where the laser is focused. The laser will operate on the X and Y axes of the longer chassis, so it's important that you place your material in alignment with the longer X and Y axes. If you are using a honeycomb bed, make certain the bed is aligned with the laser chassis. I'm placing the material in the lower left corner to ensure that it is perpendicular to the X and Y axes of the engraver. You can physically move the laser head close to the center and then click on the Fire button to position the laser over the center of the work. When you're happy with the position, go to the laser window and click on Start from Current Position. Click on Frame to verify that the laser and material are positioned properly. And when you're happy with it, click on Start. Lightburn will tell you how long the project will run. For this project, it's about 18 minutes. We're using the setting of 100% power for all the objects. When I started the laser, I noticed there was a lot of smoke, and the image, which is the first object to be engraved, was very dark. So I stopped the laser and adjusted the power settings for the image and the text to 50%. Flip the material over and start it again. Ignoring the first layer, the laser starts with the image and engraves it from the bottom up. Then the text, and lastly cuts the border. Lasers with more watts will run faster, but 5 watts is adequate for our purposes, at least for now. The good news, should our needs change, this longer engraver can be upgraded to 10 or 20 watts without replacing the chassis. So, about 18 minutes later, Bob's your uncle. Here's the finished product. Happy engraving.